Jeremiah chapter 33, and we will re-engage in our study of this book tonight. And I handed out a sheet. I was telling Deborah that this afternoon I handed out a list of the dates and which chapters we would be covering, and I believe this is 33 and 34 nights. I hope I printed it right in the sheets that I handed out to you. But those may become paper airplanes before it's all said and done, because I was looking at this today, and I might push the gas pedal just even a little faster than I had originally anticipated, because we're kind of in a section now where we can kind of look at things in blocks. You know, here's a block of information, here's a block of information, and here's a block of information. And so we'll see. I'm not saying I'm already off the schedule. I'm just warning you ahead. I may push the gas pedal a little faster, just depending on how things go. And if you're talking, that's fine. But I'm not going to talk just to talk about each chapter. So if we go a little slower because you're commenting, then we'll go a little slower. If I'm the one doing the talking, then I'm going to go a little faster. So we'll see how that works. So Jeremiah chapter 33, there's this issue, and Jeremiah's been where? And some conversations have been happening.
He's in prison.
Okay, he's basically been in prison. He's kind of under guard, in court of the guard. He's in verse 1 there in the American Standard Version. He's been imprisoned by whom?
Zedekiah.
By Zedekiah. Because Zedekiah is tired of what? Tired of listening. Okay? Does the fact that Zedekiah puts Jeremiah in the inner court here, or in the court of the guard, change anything that Jeremiah is saying? No. He can imprison him all day long. He can put him in capture, put him under guard, do whatever he's going to do. It's not going to change the fact that Jeremiah has been telling them the truth in relationship to the message of God all along. And there have been moments throughout this, and keep in mind it's kind of hard because you get it. The book isn't in chronology. Sometimes you get a piece of part of chronology, and then it'll bounce backwards, and then you'll come back forward in terms of time. And so, but this besiegement, the early captivity that went away, there's all kinds of pieces of the puzzle in terms of timing that are going on. And if we're to Zedekiah, we're kind of the end of this process. And so he's dealing with this last king over Judah prior to the captivity, I should say. And so here's this process of time where there's a lot of events and a lot of bouncing back and forth in terms of the time period that you're dealing with here and there. But here's Jeremiah. There have been evidences all along that he's been telling the truth. There have been things that he said, this is what's going to happen, and guess what? That's what happened. Okay, it's exactly what he had said, what happened. It's happened. And so there should be plenty of evidence for them to be listening. But Zedekiah says, I'm not listening, and not only am I not listening, but I'm going to try to limit his access to people as best I can as well. So God speaks to him anyway, though. Jehovah that formeth it to establish it, Jehovah is his name in verse 2. Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and will show thee great things and difficult, which thou knowest not. For thus saith Jehovah the God of Israel concerning the houses of the city, and concerning the houses of the kings of Judah, which are broken down to make a defense against the mounds and against the sword, while men come to fight with the Chaldeans, and to fill them with the dead bodies of men, whom I have slain in my anger and in my wrath, for all whose wickedness I have hid my face from this city. What's coming to Jerusalem? Destruction, right? Challenge. In fact, he says the place that was once a place to honor God, God says, I'm going to allow the Babylonians to use that place as what? Put dead bodies there, okay? You know, a place that was once a place that you would see people being honoring God. God says, in mine anger, I'm bringing this judgment, and it's going to mount. Okay, the problems for Judah are going to mount, and the difficulties are going to come. But he flips it, doesn't he, in verse 6? What's he say after that's coming? Okay, health and healing. All right? God hasn't been persuaded away from the judgment that he's bringing. Condemnation's still coming. Destruction's still coming. There's still difficulties that are going to come to Judah. But on the heels of that, he also says, though, as soon as I'm done, then what? I'm going to help you. Okay? I'm going to restore you. We talked already in our studies that sometimes in order to be healed, you have to be what first? Tear down, right? You got to be broken down. Sometimes to find healing, you got to kind of get broke down to the bottom first so that you can kind of be restored from start to finish. Sometimes we don't get broken down enough. Sometimes we we make superficial attempts to try in some ways to appease God that I'm making changes. But I haven't broken down, especially when it comes to sinful behaviors, I haven't been broken down enough for God to be able to actually then restore and cure me, if you will, bring health to me. That's what He's going to do to the people. That's what's happening or coming to Judah. They're going to be broken down so that He can heal and restore and cure them. It's the word used in the American Standard Version. I think other translations probably use that word as well there in verse 6. He says, I will reveal unto them abundance of what? Peace and truth. Okay? So, from this point forward, from about verse 6 to about verse 11, is one of your questions in your worksheets, how's God's future of grace on Judah, and how's His view of them going to change? In what ways?
He's going to bring health and a cure and peace and truth.
Okay. So let's ask the question, though, and it took me a minute because I kind of did the same thing. I just started listing the things that He was going to do, but I want you to notice the question, though. He said, how is His view of Judah going to change? Those are the things He's going to do for Judah that are going to change. But how does His view of them change?
From anger to acceptance.
Okay, so His view goes from anger because of sin to peace because of, okay, out of His love, but what generally brings the peace of God in relationship to it? Obedience and I think I heard it. Obedience and what do you do when you sin? Repentance. Okay?
You're right.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is on the, well, it is in theory.
It is in faith.
There you go. Now it is. I just turn the monitor back on. So here's this anger over sin, but peace and truth over their penitence, and they're willing to use that which is broken down. It's one thing for God to break you down, but you don't learn anything from it. What benefit is it? None. Okay? He breaks you down, and He illustrates and demonstrates and shows the conduct that is egregious to Him. But if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't restore the relationship. So their relationship with God and His view of them changes because you see them change. Not God hasn't changed at all. He's the same God. He's the same character. He's got the same character traits. He just sees them differently because of their reaction to the discipline and correction. When the penitence kicks in, the peace and truth will come back. Is that true of us? Yeah. When sin remains, we are an enemy of God. We're at enmity between ourselves and God. Accept the discipline and correction that He provides, that He can heal and cure us as well, and bring health to the relationship again. So that's the imagery we can see in relationship to what's happening with them and with us. What I appreciate about that as well is God doesn't leave them in that broken down state. God doesn't break you or I down spiritually to leave us there. His intent is not to break us down and then leave us. His intent is to break us down and restore us. I think sometimes we miss that in this conversation because it is very vivid. And the consequences of sin and the devastation of sin and everything that these men have brought to themselves because of their own making and decisions and choices, and particularly the idolatry. But God doesn't want to break them down and leave them in destruction. His hope is the discipline may change, and that He can be a God and they can be His people again.
Most of the people we bring them back are a different group too, aren't they?
Yeah. They're a younger generation that gets to return and get this second. Although there obviously are some.
There's mixed in with them.
Yes, there are some that had seen the original temple at least. So you have some that have connection to this time period and the next. So go back to the text. He'll cause the captivity of Judah in verse 7. The captivity of Israel to return. I'll build them as at first. I'll cleanse them. Okay. The beauty of forgiveness is the cleansing, right? We talk about arise and be baptized, washing away your sins, calling upon the name of the Lord. The beauty of baptism for us is the cleansing power and the ability to have sins washed away. And that's what He's doing for them as well, this cleansing of their transgressions and difficulties. Was the city experiencing much joy and merrymaking during the time of the captivity and the time that Nebuchadnezzar was pressing? No. And can it get so depressing that it seems like the joy and the peace and the merry heart will never return? Yeah. And so his message is, don't think that way. The message he has is, notice it, he said in verse 9, this city shall be to me for a name of joy, for a praise and for a glory, before all nations of the earth, which shall hear all the good that I do unto them, and shall fear and tremble for all the good and for all the peace that I procure unto it. The nations round about, their initial reaction to God's judgment over Judah is going to be what? Yeah, mock and ridicule. Their God's abandoned them, right? Their God's abandoned them. They're no nation at all. This God that was supposed to be so powerful and so mighty and led them through all these different things, He's not doing anything for them anymore. He's powerless. But when they see Him restore this nation back again, then the conversation changes about that God. And ultimately, we're going to see in this text that ultimately comes to full fruition in who? In Jesus. Okay. Ultimately, it comes to fullness of everything that He's talking about in relationship to Jesus. There was a place that would be without man or without beast, emptiness, desolate, to the point where people would think nothing would ever inhabit or reside there again. But God says, I'm bringing you home. And you'll come back, and the voice of joy and the voice of gladness will all return back to that place. Thoughts up to that moment before I move forward.
You said earlier that really chronological order. Last week when he was on jail, and they were telling him to go buy a piece of land, I was kind of trying to figure out how he was going to get out of jail to go buy a piece of land.
Well, I had that in my mind. I didn't really talk about it much, but you wonder a little bit whether he could be able to make that happen. Somebody come to him, and then send the seal. Remember, he said, send it to Baruch and seal that up. But you're right, it is an interesting. You don't know how much confinement is in relation. How much liberty are people able to come and go and see him. How much permission Zedekiah is permitting. But obviously, God's going to give him some kind of connection to fulfill those purposes.
Well, it states that he's held prisoner in the courtyard.
Yeah.
So obviously, he's not in chains or anything.
Right.
They're trying to get him to change the color of his prophecies.
Yeah.
So that Zedekiah will look better and the people will be more pleased. But that's not happening.
And you can imagine quite a spectacle too, that you confine him to this one location, and people would come to know that. There's that prophet Jeremiah. Zedekiah's got him kind of confined to that courtyard over there.
Is he talking to Israel and Judah both?
Seems to be.
Seems to
be. He's speaking to both nations. Remember last week we talked about, or Sunday we talked about how they're going to come from all the places of captivity. Both the early captives of Israel and Judah, remnants would come back again. All right, moving forward. Make sure I don't. There's something I wanted to mention. Okay. So he said in verse 12, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, yet again shall there be in this place, which is waste, without man and without beast, and with all the cities thereof, a habitation of shepherds, causing their flocks to lie down. You let somebody, what is that? What's the imagery? Peace, rest. Okay? Shepherds, leaders will return and they'll lead the people to peace and rest. Not all this turmoil. From the hill country to the cities of the lowland, the cities of the south, land of Benjamin, places about Jerusalem, cities of Judah, shall the flocks again pass under the hands of him that numbereth them, saith Jehovah. This restoration is legitimate, in other words. God's going to genuinely care for them. They'll be guided, and they'll be led, and they'll find peace and comfort. It's full restoration. God isn't bringing them back part way and say, well, I'm going to give you a certain handful of privileges, but I'm never going to bring you back all the way. It's full restoration that He has in store for them. And He says in verse 15, I will cause a branch of righteousness to grow up unto David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. And there's a question in relationship to that. It says, aside from the promise of a return from captivity, God also promised the growth of a branch of righteousness. And the question is, who was this? Most likely He's talking about Jesus in that moment. Especially because He uses the singular he, a single person, that will allow for righteousness to return to anybody who will embrace it.
You got Zedekiah, the last king on David's throne. So when they are sent to Babylon, that is the end of all monarchy under David's throne until Christ.
And yet, through the lineage of David, ultimately comes Jesus, the heritage. The interesting part about it is He never sits where? On the earthly throne. Never sits on the earthly throne. That's what His disciples wanted. Remember when He's raised from the dead, they said, all right, time to restore you back to David's throne. What did He say? No, He said, my kingdom is not of this world. It's not about David's throne. In that sense, part of the heritage, that's how He's going to come about. But Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world. When His disciples compelled Him to restore the nation, He said, that's not what I came here to do. I didn't come to restore a physical nation. I came to lead all men into one nation through His blood. And so this promise about a branch of righteousness that's going to extend not just to Judah, not just to Israel, but to whom?
Everybody.
Everybody. Okay. Everybody's going to now have access and benefit from this branch of righteousness that is to come. In those days shall Judah be saved, Jerusalem shall dwell safely. And this is the name whereby she shall be called Jehovah our righteousness. This restoration of righteous behavior and relationship with God that would come. For thus saith Jehovah, David shall never want a man to sit upon the throne of the house of Israel, neither shall the priests, the Levites, want a man before me to offer burnt offerings and to burn meal offerings and to do sacrifice continually. Your thoughts are as good as mine.
It's kind of like a contradiction.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
You got a little bit further along here, it talks about the demonic descendants and the Levite descendants, which Christ being the descendant of David, and we become the priests when we join the church. So we would be considered into that context of descendants of the Levites.
Right. And so the idea is ultimately that system comes to a what? It comes to an end. You don't need a Levitical priesthood because all the saints are what? We're all called to be priests. Okay, the priesthood is the church. The priesthood is the people of God. And so all men are called to be priests. And so no longer do you need this Levitical system. No longer do you need a line of priests that offer the burnt offerings and the meal offerings and those things. Because Jesus does what? He becomes the high priest. Okay?
Eternal priesthood.
That's right. And not after the order of the Levites, but after the order of Melchizedek. The Bible teaches us that his priesthood is not after Levite. In fact, it can't be because he's what? He's tribe of Judah. He's not even part of Jesus was not even part of the Levitical system. He was of the tribe of Judah. And so he says, I'm a different high priest. Who was Melchizedek?
High priest.
King of Salem.
Right, King of Salem. Relationship to Abraham, I believe, or connection there. And no beginning, no lineage. You couldn't trace him. It wasn't about family history with him. It was just about his relationship with God. Jesus says that's the kind of high priest I am. And I'll have all of my saints, all the disciples, we become that priesthood. And so that's what I see in these couple of verses is that this system, when that branch of righteousness comes, when Jesus arrives, it's transitional. from that old system where you needed a new man, a new person to step up and fulfill those roles, year after year after year. Don't need that anymore under Jesus. And so it goes away.
Well, we're told in Hebrews that the blood of bulls and goats would not forgive sin, would not cause sin to go away. Jesus had to die and be that one that is the permanent, the perfect sacrifice. In order, even he had to take the old law away before he could be a high priest under the old law. He couldn't have been. So he had to take that law out of the way.
Right. And that's an interesting observation, because you can't, in some senses, you can't have it both ways. He can't be the high priest and be a high priest over the Old Testament system the way it was written, because he's part of the wrong tribe. And so when we try to mingle the two, there's conflict within that. So the Word of God continues to come. Verse 19 and 20. If you can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night, so that there shall not be day and night in their season, then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, and he shall not have a son to reign upon his throne, and with the Levites the priests my ministers. As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me. How's Jesus going to accomplish that? He's going to offer it where? Everyone. Okay, you become innumerable, because you're no longer counting father after father after father, the next guy and the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. You don't do that anymore. That process is done away with, and all men who come to Jesus become part of this, and they're innumerable. And so in essence, he says, I can make a promise to multiply David without it having to be part of this Old Testament covenant. I can fulfill a promise of letting him multiply beyond measure and it not have to be under that Old Testament system. I can still make it happen. As all men come to Jesus and find their connection to David there. And would God's promise ever go away? No. That was an answer to your question, by the way. God's promises hold true. He said, Thus saith Jehovah, verse 25, If my covenant of day and night stand not, if I have not appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth, then will I also cast away the seed of Jacob and of David my servant, so that I will not take of his seed to be rulers over the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for I will cause their captivity to return, and will have mercy on them. So God is speaking both of twofold again. He's talking about their return to the land and the ultimate benefits that come when the branch of righteousness, when Jesus arrives. When we don't have to concern ourselves with all of this heritage and lineage and who belongs to what tribe. We all belong to whom? Jesus. And so God fulfills His covenant and promise to perpetuate these things ultimately through Jesus, not just through a physical heritage anymore. Thoughts, questions up to that point before we ask lessons for today and then move to chapter 34.
Day and night, not like saying 24/7.
Yeah.
It's continuing.
It's continuing. That's right. That's the imagery that is shown there. God is continual in His covenants and promises. So what do you see? What lessons are there in this text?
Seek the blessings you must obey.
Okay. It's a point we've seen before, but obedience is necessary. Penitence comes when you're broken down. What else?
We're looking for a new covenant.
Okay. We especially saw that in the last chapter, but there's a new covenant coming through a branch of righteousness, through God's Son ultimately, where it's easier for us to see it because we can see it all. I was thinking about that today. So here we are sometimes discussing things, and we're trying to figure out timing of events and chronology and lineage, and the fact of the matter is everything we're talking about, either way you look at it, has already been what? It's already happened. Okay? Jesus has already come. That's already happened. All these things that He's promising, the captivity and their return, it's already happened. And so sometimes we can kind of look at these things and we're trying to figure some very minute details out when we're trying to figure out minute details of something that has already been done and over with and gone. So don't get too lost in the details. Learn the education, the lessons that are there. What else did you see?
God is always ready to answer our prayers.
Okay. Yeah. God.
But we have to ask.
Yeah. God's prepared to extend. Let me just. God's ready to cleanse. We pray penitently. What I appreciate about the text was when God cleanses, it's what? It's gone. It's gone. The cleansing power of God is far different than the cleansing power of anything else that we know of. The cleansing power of God is tremendous, and I appreciate that. The other thing I noted too was the not simple, but tremendous respect that we should have, because it's interesting. Generally, when you talk about lineage of kings, you're talking about a king, and he gives the power over to whom? His son, and his son, and his son as best you can, until God steps in and says, nope, your family's no longer involved, give it to a different family. Then you might have a run of a handful of sons. They might run into some problems, and God stops them too. But ultimately, where's it all in? Yeah, in God's son. All of that lineage, one after another, then saying, nope, Saul, sorry, you stepped out of bounds. Your heritage won't get it. And you move forward and you see other moments where sons are skipped or different families get involved. But ultimately, the end of all of this is the king, the one branch, the one righteous one, who is the Son of God, who puts an end to all of the challenges and difficulties of all that process, and just says, here's your king. Come to me. Here's your king. Good, Ron.
When that branch of righteousness comes, and you go to verse 18, and that's what I was talking about a little bit ago, we won't have to kindle meat offerings and do sacrifices continually like the priests had to do.
Yeah.
But Jesus offered that sacrifice once for all time.
Yeah.
So that's why he can forgive our sins through repentance and prayer instantly.
Yeah. And because Jesus provides for us. God through His Son gives us twofold. He gives us a king. He gives us a high priest who becomes our access to the Father. All things connect to Jesus. And now I don't need a burnt offering, a meal offering. I don't need the high priest to go and make sacrifice for his sins and my sins. Jesus paid. It's paid. And we're able to move beyond.
There will be no more sacrifice.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
When God speaks to Jeremiah again there in the courtyard, basically what Jeremiah's telling the people is how bad things are going to be, but God still loves us. God's still going to take care of you. God's going to still restore you. He's going to bring you back.
People will learn from this education process, for lack of a better way to describe it. Mercy's coming. And ultimately, what greater act of mercy could there be than to shed the blood of His own Son to bring them? Okay, jump to chapter 34. Who does God gives Jeremiah a message here in chapter 34. Who's it for? Initially, anyway. Okay, time to go talk to Zedekiah about some things. Zedekiah is the one who's been trying to stymie the work of Jeremiah. God says, I got a message for Zedekiah, I need to tell him. So it comes to Jeremiah from Jehovah. When Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army, and all the kingdoms of the earth that were under his dominion, and all the peoples were fighting against Jerusalem, and against all the cities thereof, saying, here's the message. Go and speak to Zedekiah, king of Judah, and tell him, thus saith Jehovah, behold, I will give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall burn it with fire. Zedekiah had been trying what? Trying to persuade Jeremiah to change his thinking about what he's telling Zedekiah and the people. So whatever time period we're dealing with in terms of process of time, how long he's been trying to do this, what's Jeremiah come tell Zedekiah?
It's not changing.
It hasn't changed. Nothing's changed here, Zedekiah. Okay? Nothing's changed. Trouble's still coming. The city's going down. It's going to be burnt with fire. And thou shalt not escape out of his hand, but shalt surely be taken and delivered into his hand. And thine eyes shall behold the eyes of the king of Babylon, and he shall speak thee mouth to mouth, and thou shalt go to Babylon. So, good news, Zedekiah, you're not going to what? You're not going to die, at least on the battlefield here in Jerusalem. Bad news is what?
You gotta go against Babylon.
Yeah, you got to go, and you got to have to what?
Face to face.
You have to come face to face with it.
You have to watch your kids be killed. Then
Yeah.
that's the last thing you say.
Yeah, there's going to be lots of things happening moving forward here. But he's going to have to go deal with Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, all Zedekiah had to do was what? And things would have been fine. And, obey God way back. But once God's even set the captivity and set things in motion, what's he got to do? Obey. That's right. Submit to Nebuchadnezzar. That's all God really had asked the people to do. That's been, if you go back to the early message of Jeremiah, submit to Nebuchadnezzar. Don't resist. Don't fight. Don't war. I'm doing this, not Nebuchadnezzar, not Babylon. God says, I'm doing this. So you can't fight me. You can't resist me. And so just submit, and things will be a whole lot better. But what's Zedekiah do? He keeps resisting. He keeps challenging. And so eventually, Jeremiah says, it's real easy to be resistant to Nebuchadnezzar when you're sitting on a throne in Jerusalem, right? As a king. But it's going to be a whole lot different when you got to face him face to face. And you can only imagine Zedekiah's mindset when Jeremiah says, you're going to have to go deal with him. You're going to have to go see him face to face. You'll not die by the sword. You'll die in peace and with the burnings of thy fathers, the former kings that were before thee, so shall they make a burning for thee, and they shall lament thee, saying, Ah, Lord, for I have spoken the word, saith Jehovah. Why did they lament? Because Zedekiah had what?
He had people's heart.
Okay? But did Zedekiah know what he should be doing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Isn't there a greater lament when somebody knew better? There's a greater lamentation when somebody knew better. And so this figure of the prior kings, you can almost, in this symbolic gesture, hear all these prior kings that have gone on and died before him. And they figuratively look at Zedekiah and they lament and mourn over the opportunity he had been handed, and he just goes away and dishonors the opportunity to serve God in the right way. So we'll see more. I don't want to fast forward too much. We'll see more of what happens to Zedekiah as we continue the study. But here's what Jeremiah is telling us coming. Zedekiah, this is what you have to look forward to, and the difficulties that are coming for you, and ultimately his family will see some of that as well. When the king of Babylon's army was fighting against Jerusalem, against all the cities of Judah that were left, against Lachish and Azekah, for these alone remained of the cities of Judah as fortified cities. So the nation is what? It's crumbling. Okay, the nation's crumbling. We're down to a handful of fortified cities where, Nebuchadnezzar's winning. He's winning. And I'm sure there are messengers traveling from city to city letting folks know, here's the demise. And Lachish is about to fall. All these things that are happening in relationship to these challenges. So fast forward now. There's a problem in the land. What is it? What had they not been doing that they were supposed to do every 7 years? Okay, supposed to be releasing in particular which one? Jewish. Okay, so if you had a Jewish every 7 years, you're done. You have paid your service. Now keep in mind, a lot of the people became slaves in different ways. We kind of think of slavery as people going and taking people against their will and taking them to foreign countries and enslaving them. Slavery had a twofold kind. There was some of that potentially, but there was also servitude. I owed you a debt. I can't pay it, and so I become your slave, bondservant. Okay, and so you were told every 7 years if they worked off their debt to you, you set them free. you're supposed to set them free. And so, verse 10, all the princes and all the people obeyed that had entered into the covenant, that everyone should let his manservant and everyone his maidservant go free, that none should make bondmen of them any more. They obeyed and let them go. Sound good? Yeah. Okay. What's the problem?
Turn right back around.
All right, very next verse, they turn right back around and go and bring them all back. Reading from historical perspective, from what I can gather, what's going on in this time period is Nebuchadnezzar, he's about to be overtaken. Okay, we're towards the end, and he's about, and so you kind of had a couple things going on. So if you lived out in the countryside and you you see the armies squeezing, where are you going? Okay, and in particular, where are you heading? You're figuring the last stronghold of the nation is going to be its capital, right? And so people from the countryside are coming into Jerusalem. Historical documents illustrate that those who were from the countryside were less likely to have honored the law in relationship to the slaves, as were people who were in Jerusalem who still had at least a traditional connection to the law. And so there was some uprising among the people of Jerusalem saying, why are these people out here? That fellow looks like he's been enslaved for 100 years. Why hasn't he ever been released? So you come to this point, and the battle's being waged. And if I need as many bodies, if I need as many people on my side as I can get, then what might be a good gesture to make that happen? You're free. Here's a sword, right? Okay? I'm going to set you free. But come fight with us. Come help us in this battle. About this time period, Egypt starts pressing against Nebuchadnezzar. He gets distracted. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar's about to be done with Judah. Egypt comes along and distracts him for a minute. Jerusalem gets to go and take a breath. And what they do in verse 11? I don't see a problem. I'm not so sure Nebuchadnezzar's going to get here. You guys need to come be my slave again. And so there's this inconsistency of the covenant and honoring. Afterwards, they turned and caused the servants and the handmaids whom they had let go free to return, brought them into subjection for servants and for handmaids. So God speaks again. I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, saying, at the end of 7 years you shall let go every man his brother that is a Hebrew, that hath been sold unto thee, and hath served thee 6 years. Thou shalt let him go free from thee, but your fathers hearkened not unto me, neither inclined their ear. Basically, God said, listen, I brought you out of what when you were in Egypt? I brought you out of slavery when you were in Egypt. So God says, in a sense, I find it inconsistent with my mercy to let you out of bondage in Egypt to be set free, for you then to go turn around and enslave your own people for long periods of time. And so he says, a man becomes a bondservant, you set him free. In that 7th year, you turn him loose. He's no longer a bondservant to you. No longer this idea of continually having these servants under you in that fashion. So he established guidelines, covenant. But they weren't honoring, the text says. You were now turned, verse 15, and had done that which is right in mine eyes, in proclaiming liberty, every man to his neighbor, and you had made a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. But you turned and profaned my name, and caused every man his servant and every man his handmaid, whom ye had let go free, at their pleasure to return, and ye brought them into subjection to be unto you for servants and for handmaids. He says, this is embarrassing. He said, you stood before my house, and you all made a covenant, an agreement, that it was time to reestablish and re-honor what God had said about releasing them after serving you. And then you turned around and broke that covenant and went right back and hauled them all back and made them servants to you again. Verse 17, you haven't listened to me. to give them liberty, every man to his brother and every man to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim unto you a liberty, saith Jehovah, to the sword, to the pestilence, and to the famine. And I will make you to be tossed to and fro among all the kingdoms of the earth. You can't even honor the simplest of arrangements of allowing you're just adding iniquity on top of iniquity on top of iniquity. And every time I turn and think that maybe there's a glimmer here, maybe there's a glimmer that they're realizing they ought to behave in certain ways better, you make this covenant, things look good, you're restoring them, turning loose those servants out, and then you turn right back around and do the back opposite. So I'm going to set you free. I'm going to set you free to receive what? Pestilence. Sword, pestilence, and famine. You couldn't honor the covenant. The challenges are coming. I will give the men that have transgressed my covenant and not performed the words of the covenant which they made before me, when they cut the calf in twain and passed between the parts thereof. There was a symbolic gesture that they would use at times when you would cut a calf, divide it right down the middle. You would set the parts on each side, and the people, in making an agreement, a covenant, would meet in the center between the two, and you would seal that covenant so that it's the idea of equality. You're making a fair covenant between them. You've divided this calf right down the middle. And there's some text in Scripture, I believe in Genesis 15. If you go back and look, you'll see that happening. An example of that, where they divide that calf and some other animals there, except for they had some birds, but they didn't just cut them in half. But anyway, they split this in half, and it's a symbolic showing of equality. It just didn't happen.
Is this symbolic, this calf of the Israelite nation and Judah and Israel then being divided into half?
I don't think so, because I think if you go back and look at the earlier reference, and I believe it's Genesis 15. Somebody can check me on later. I'm running out of time. But so you're before the divided kingdom the first time you see it. I think it has more to do with the covenant than it does with an illustration of a divided kingdom.
If I'm correct, this is 2015 would be one of the years that they would do this 7-year thing to erase the debt.
Yeah, I'd have to go look. It's possible because I think there is some orthodoxy that still exists among the Jews of which year certain things are still supposed to occur. Yep. That would be interesting to look at, because it is interesting. There are some Jewish Orthodox folks that still try to honor certain, even if they don't own servants, they would still illustrate it as this is the year it should happen.
Right.
Yep. So they're going to be given into the hands of the enemies. Zedekiah, king of Judah, verse 21, and his princes will be given into the hand of their enemies, into the hand of them that seek their life, into the hand of the king of Babylon's army that are gone away from you. Behold, I will command, saith Jehovah, and cause them to return to this city. And they shall fight against it, and take it, and burn it with fire. And I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitants. I think verse 22 gives you a clue to what we mentioned earlier about Nebuchadnezzar being distracted for a period of time. Because notice he said, I will command, saith Jehovah, and cause them to return to this city. They've been distracted. People think, oh, maybe this is over. Maybe all is well. And so let's get the slaves back. Let's get the servants back. And God says, no. He may be distracted for a minute, but I'm going to make him return and finish this. And he will. Anyway. Any quick comments? Oh, you didn't get the bell. Sorry. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
When he put Jeremiah in prison, he thought he could control the word of God.
Yeah. And you cannot control the message. No matter how much we like to control the message, you can't control it. It's not under our authority. And Zedekiah could do anything he wanted to do, but he's not going to control that message that comes from God. All right, Lord willing, we'll come back and look at chapter 35 on Sunday.